Well, the whole thing about the writer who sees the job as a burden and something they struggle along, it makes me think there was an album by a rock artist named Todd Rundgren. It was called The Ever Popular Tortured Artist Effect. And I sometimes think that writers draw this, this cloak of the tortured artist around them because A, you can get free drinks, and B, chicks love it. You know, they love that tortured thing going on. But I've always thought that it was a terrific job, and I've always felt very, very fortunate, blessed really, to be able to do it. Because I do it for free if I couldn't do it for money, but I love doing it for money. That sounds kind of nasty, doesn't it? I love doing it for money. A lot of times when people come to see me, they want to see if I'm really f***ed up. You know? Here's the thing, okay? A lot of times, if you're recording all this, you're going to have to bleep it because I have to be who I am. A lot of times, you know, when I do these interviews, they'll ask you questions and they'll say, what was your childhood like? And I no longer brook that question. I just tell the interviewer, what you want to know is what traumatized me so badly that I write this creepy shit. The answer is nothing. Nothing that I remember anyway, but of course, I wouldn't tell you anyway. Particularly in the horror genre, there are only 3 or 4 really good ideas, and we've all done them before, and it's really, okay, I mean, like, how many times in your life have you eaten eggs? But there's always a new way to fix eggs, and, you know, I look at it that way. You can always find a new way to do it. But, I think that there are as many ideas as there are sort of probing, talented minds to explore those ideas. People will say, do you keep a notebook? And the answer is, I think a writer's notebook is the best way in the world to immortalize bad ideas. My idea about a good idea is one that sticks around and sticks around and sticks around. It's like, to me, it's like if you were to put breadcrumbs in a strainer and shake it, which is what the passage of time is for me. It's like shaking a strainer. All this stuff that's not very big and not very important just kind of dissolves and falls out. But the good stuff stays. You know, the big pieces stay. I had the idea for Under the Dome when I was teaching high school back in 1973, and it was just too big for me, and I was too young for it. And I wrote about 25, 26 pages and put it away. There's a scene at the beginning of this book where this woodchuck gets cut in half when this dome comes down over this town. I had written that part when I was in my early 20s and just sort of recreated it from memory when I wrote the book. So the good stuff stays. The best description of writing a novel that I ever heard is actually in Thomas Williams's book, The Hair of Harold Rue, which is about a novelist trying to write a novel, and it just covers like 1 or 2 days in this process, and a lot of things happen to him. It's a fabulous book. But he says that writing a novel is like building a little campfire on an empty, dark plain, and one by one, these characters come out of the dark, and each one has a little pile of wood, and they put it on the fire, and if you're very lucky, before the fire goes out, it's this big bonfire, and all the characters stand around it and warm themselves. And that's the way it's always been for me. I have a good friend over in Vermont, John Irving, and John says that he always begins a novel by writing the last line. And to me, that's like eating your dessert before you eat the meal. And everybody works a different way, and God bless John, and he's done some wonderful work in his lifetime, and he'll probably do some more, but I could never write a book that way. The way that I think of it, you know, is that fire. I love that particular image, but I've also always thought of it in terms of there's a little thread, a little red thread that goes into a hole in the baseboard, and you just start to pull it out, and you see what's on the other end of it, and sooner or later you get there. For me, the fun of writing novels isn't in the finished product, which I don't care about that much. There's a guy who was looking at my shelf over there. All the books are on the shelf, and to me, those are like dead skin. The things that are done, but I love the process.
A little while later, I wrote a book called The Shining, and it was my third book, and I got contractual rights to write the first draft screenplay for that. And I did do that, and I found out later that Stanley Kubrick, who had got the rights through Warner Brothers, had already determined that he and a lady named Diane Johnson were going to do the screenplay for The Shining. So they basically, my screenplay went in and they said, no, this won't do, and then they went on to what they really wanted to do, which was fine. I wasn't angry or upset. You're not, after a while. You get thousands of rejection slips before you break through. You kind of get used to that, and it's just part of the game. But the thing is, you learn little by little.
You release books differently now than you used to, in that, like, do you have a different definition of what a successful book is, or on the eve of a book's release, do you pay a special kind of attention to how it will be received or how it's being reviewed?
I think that if you spend too much time worrying about what the audience is going to like, that they're not going to like anything that you do. I just look for ideas that I really enjoy, something that I really want to live with for a while, like the story about the people under the dome. Mm-hmm. And I get into it most of the time, and then I just have a ball. I never finished a book and felt like I'm glad that's done. I usually finish a book and say, geez, I don't want to say goodbye to these people. Mm-hmm. And if the people who read it feel the same way, then I'm really happy.
Look, you know, a lot of these interviews, the question that's the worst is people will say, where do you get your ideas? I don't know where I get them. You know, and if I did, man, would I tell you? I mean, Jesus, they've been good to me. All I know is that I sit down and I turn on the machine, and there's always that first 10 minutes that's like smelling a dead fish or walking into a monkey house. And then something will click a little tiny bit, and that leads to something else. And it's like until it's going faster and faster. And then you hit this kind of escape velocity. You're gone. The world, the normal, mundane, sort of stupid world where you got to do the breakfast dishes and you got to make the beds, you know, and you got to worry about getting the kid to the dentist. All that's gone. But there's a place where you have to walk away from it because it's so kind of addictive. That otherwise, you might just sit there and skip meals and just be lost in that world. And you wouldn't want to do that because that's sort of the way crazy people are in institutions. You know what I'm saying?
And here's a secret I learned 6 summers ago, lying in a ditch beside the road, covered in my own blood, and thinking that I was going to die. You go out broke. Everything's on loan anyway. You're not an owner. You're only a steward. So pass some of it on. You may not have much now, but you're going to have a lot. And when you do, remember the ones who don't have anything. A dime out of every dollar.
Brian De Palma made a film out of Carrie, and I was a very young writer, and you know, I got no particular consideration, and certainly nobody sent me a screener or set up a screening or anything like that. I don't think screeners had been invented in 1975. That's how old I am. But anyway, they had sneak previews on Halloween night, I think 1975. And the idea was that they would piggyback Carrie on another film, and you would get 2 for the price of 1, and that way they would get an idea of what the potential was for the film. So they were gonna do a screening, one of these screenings in Boston. And I said to my wife, let's go in the car and go down and see what they made out of my book. And she said, okay, so we went down. Well, the film was in Roxbury, which at that time was a fairly black suburb.
And it was playing with a black, not exploitation, but a black-oriented comedy called Norman, Is That You?, which starred Red Fox. And we were like 2 little grains of salt in a pepper shaker in that theater. And Norman, Is That You? Was really funny, and the audience was rocking and rolling and everything. And I leaned over to my wife and said, what's coming next is a film about a little skinny white girl with menstrual problems. And this audience is gonna hate it. And she said, God bless her, I mean, she fished Carrie out of the trash. I threw it away, and she picked it out. And so she said, well, why don't you wait and see? So they really got into it. And I was just amazed, but they were like totally on her side. And, you know, it was like the girls are pelting Carrie with sanitary napkins, and people in this theater are yelling, kill those bitches, you know, and stuff. Because in those days, they screamed at the screen. You know, they don't do it. People are so sophisticated now. It'd be like, don't go up those stairs. Like Jamie Lee Curtis is going to hear you and say, okay, I won't go up those stairs, you know. Get a life. So this is the thing. The end of the movie comes, and De Palma did something that nobody had done up to that time. You think the movie's over. And Sue Snell goes to Carrie's grave, and there's this music playing, it's kind of sweet and everything. See, I mean, this is such a trauma that some of you are already going, oh God, no. Because you know. And in the middle of this, while she's putting flowers on the grave, all through the movie, behind my wife and me, there were these 2 guys that were the size of NFL players, you know? They were these great big broad-shouldered strapping guys, and that arm comes out of the grave, and they scream like a couple of little girls, and they're hugging each other, and I hear one of them saying, that's it, that girl ain't never gonna be right. And I thought to myself, I may have a future in this business.